So like the title of this video says, I got my PhD at 25 years old. And I wanted to make this video kind of explaining my story to y'all and how I got my PhD at 25, and then ultimately why it doesn't even matter that I got my PhD at 25 years old. So my story, my timeline is I am in the US, and so I graduated from high school at 18 years old, a normal timeline for graduation. And then I went directly into college. In college, I got a double major in chemistry and sexuality and gender studies, and I graduated when I was 22. So I did it again, a normal 4-year timeline for undergrad, and then went into my PhD program at 22 and ended up graduating from my PhD program in chemistry with a minor in women's and gender studies at 25. So in December of 2019, I ended up graduating. So overall, my PhD program only took me 3.5 years to complete, which is fairly short for my program. My program is typically between 5 and 7 years to complete. In that time, I published 7 first authored papers, with about 5 more that are still in preparation. And I was able to get multiple awards and other things through my PhD experience. I also attended, I think, 5 different conferences in that time that were in-person conferences held off-site, and then I attended multiple others internal to the university. So I want to go over a couple of the things that made me successful in my PhD program. And I also want to let you know that I will be hosting a 2-day live event entitled The 4 Keys to Success in Your Scientific PhD Program. So if you're interested in attending that live event, make sure you check out the link below this video to register for it. But I want to touch on a few of the things that I think is not talked about as much in the PhD world that really contributed to my own PhD success. So the first thing about being successful in your PhD is becoming consistent in research. And so every single week you need to be working towards a research goal. It can be really easy because as you are transitioning from undergrad into grad school, in undergrad you had deadlines for everything had to be done by a certain time. But whenever you get into grad school, it's a little bit different because your research really has no time frame. And it technically really shouldn't have a time frame because a lot of things that can happen that can make it take longer or it can go faster. But because it has no clear deadline and time frame, it seems to be the one thing that can consistently get put off. If you want to be successful in a PhD, you need to learn how to have consistency in your research production. And so in my case, that this was often weekly goals I would set. Every week I would make sure I was making some advancement in research. So the results of that were that within my first semester, I had already completed 2 projects and had written them both up for publication. By the end of my first year and going into my second year, I had 5 total projects completed and papers written. They started coming out into my second year, and into my third year, they actually started becoming published. And that's how I ended up with 7 first authored published papers because of every single week I was getting work done. The second thing that made a big difference within my ability to complete my PhD in that time frame is focus. And in this case, I'm not talking about being able to focus on, like monotasking or only focusing on one thing at a time. What I'm talking about instead is knowing when to focus on what. And so in the beginning of my PhD journey, I was super focused on research, and that actually caused me to make a lot of mistakes in my research and moving forward because I hadn't learned how to balance all of my responsibilities that were happening. And so I first had to focus on creating a system that allowed me to balance things, allowed me not to miss meetings and other things because that was a problem that was occurring. And then I could shift my focus into my research because I already had that system that let everything else be in place. And so learning how to focus on the right things at the right time is really important for being able to be successful in your research. And research should not always be your main focus. It should change throughout your PhD journey, and other things should come more into focus, and while research takes a back seat to those things. The third major thing that helped me to be successful within my PhD was being fearless in research. And this is kind of a tricky one, but I think a lot of PhD students worry about whether or not something's going to be successful, or they're scared that if they try something and it's not successful, or they don't know what it means. And so this will hinder them a lot in being able to pursue their research. Now, I'm not talking about trying to get on an instrument that you know nothing about and just trying to work it out, at least not in the beginning when you don't know enough about anything to actually make something work. Instead, what I'm talking about is not letting the fear of something not working hold you back. So there were so many ideas that I came up with that were honestly not great ideas. But I went in and I tried to do the research until I recognized that, okay, these aren't the best ideas for a research project, or this doesn't seem very feasible, and then I would walk away from them. However, there were other ideas that I came up with that I didn't know the feasibility of them initially. And then once I ran some tests on them and started doing some experimenting, I realized that they were actually really good projects, and they've ended up in some of my publications. Being fearless enough to actually come up with research ideas and then take those ideas and start doing the experiments on them is very important for you to be successful in your PhD, rather than holding back and waiting until you kind of know everything's going to work out, because then still something can come in and mess you up. Or you could have started it 2 months ago and been done with it by now, versus having waited that long because of fear of failure. On the other hand, people can stay with projects much longer after they realize it's not really feasible, it's not working out how they want to. You can stay with that project instead of recognizing that you probably need to move to a more feasible project in order to be able to complete your research and your PhD on time. However, that fear of failure and believing that if you just keep doing the same experiments or just keep tweaking things just slightly, then it'll suddenly start working. You can have that fear and just keeping slowly working on a project that will never get completed. And sometimes these projects are because what the outcome that you're looking for is literally physically impossible. Like the natural laws of the universe won't allow you to do that. And I've seen people with those types of projects where they thought it worked, and then literally they just couldn't even create an ion of this thing. And when you thought about it, it kind of made sense why you couldn't create that. But you have to think through those things. But the fear of failure and that, oh, it's always going to be that next thing and suddenly that's going to make it work. Sometimes you have to recognize to let that fear go and move on to the next thing. So the title of this video is How I Got My PhD at 25 and Why It Doesn't Matter. So we're going to talk about why it absolutely does not matter that when you get your PhD, how long it takes you to get your PhD, or anything of the sort. Yes, I got my PhD at 25. And yes, I worked really hard to get things done to get my PhD. But me having my PhD at 25, or me completing my PhD in 3.5 years, yeah, it's a great line to put on things, but ultimately it doesn't matter in how successful I am, how much I know, or how great of an academic or student I'm going to be. There are so many things that affect your timeline through your PhD that the time that it takes you to get your PhD is essentially meaningless. It can take you 12 years to get your PhD, or it can take you 3. And what does it matter how long it takes you if you enjoyed your life between? I mean, when you think about all the different researches that are being done and all the comparisons that are being made, yes, I got my PhD in analytical chemistry. And one thing I didn't have to do in my PhD is wait for animals to mature or get cycles synced or wait for animals to give birth and then raise the young, right? So there's a lot of things that can expand your timeline that has no reflection on you. Some people will get so focused into wanting to get done at a certain time that they're essentially putting their life on hold for getting their PhD. And what you're essentially doing, if that's how you're thinking about it, is you're wasting those years of your life for education. But why are you doing that? A PhD is one of the most flexible programs to be in. Unless you have a supervisor that is monitoring your every movement and what time you need to be in the lab or not in the lab, you have flexibility in your PhD. I was not in the lab 10 hours a day every day. I did not work all of the time. Did I work more than I probably should have? Yeah, probably. And if I went and did another PhD, would I work a little bit less? Yeah, because I think being more balanced would have made me actually more productive in my PhD program. But I didn't put my life on hold to get my degree. I went out with friends, I traveled, I did all of the things that I wanted to do to enjoy my life. And you should too. Because if it takes you 5 years compared to 3 years, but you actually enjoyed your life and lived for 5 years versus put your life on hold for 3 years, which of that time frame actually means more? To me, I'd rather have 5 years of life than 3 years of just work all the time. So I wanted to kind of address those things. It doesn't matter when you're getting your PhD. It might be a nice line, but guess what? The PhD behind your name is all that matters in the end. I really hope that you liked this video, and I wanted to kind of show you a little bit more behind the scenes in my own life. If you have questions for me about my journey or my story, please comment them below. I'd love to be able to engage with y'all more and share a little bit more of the behind the scenes of my life. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one.